Have you ever wondered why some people can speak nearly native Mandarin and chat with native speakers so easily? After teaching 730 students Mandarin pronunciation and helping them live toward their speaking and listening goals, I discovered 9 critical mistakes that stop 95% of people from reaching their Chinese learning goals. Avoid them and your Mandarin journey will be 10 times easier and faster. Number 1. Focusing on the wrong things. When learning Chinese, people love to jump straight into memorizing vocab and grammar and characters, but they ignore pronunciation and tones. My student Rain shared his previous learning process in our Discord group, and it broke my heart. He memorized 3,000 traditional Hanzi and 9,000 words, which is awesome. But he ignored tones using English mnemonics as a guide for pronunciation. He shadowed full Chinese podcasts, which is an amazing study tactic, but he did it at full speed without really understanding. The result? Gibberish. He got tons of speaking practice, but asked for no corrections, which ended up solidifying those bad mistakes. He fixed it, but if he'd done things right from the start, it would have gone a lot more smoothly. My student Na Ran, who I've done a full breakdown of before, came to me with quite a few months of intensive learning under her belt. But like many Chinese people learning English, her previous teacher never had her actually speak. So when I first talked to her, she couldn't understand anything. We crafted a targeted plan to get her on the right track, and 8 months later,
我知道你想要什么。
she was doing pretty okay. Personally, my first 30 years of English learning were all in China, where speaking definitely wasn't stressed. So even though I knew a lot of words and I could read just fine, when I came to the US for the first time, speaking and listening were horrifying. Switching focus to the right thing took time, but when you are properly dialed in, you can make progress very quickly. Number 2, confusing pronunciation and accent. Anytime I bring up accents, people get offended and educate me that English has so many accents and it's totally fine.
You have an accent, Rita.
And that's true. It does, and I do. The issue is that these two things are still quite related. Let's ignore for a second the fact that an accent carries a lot of information about your culture, identity, and social background. When it comes to learning a language, the goal should be to get as close as possible to a crisp, clear pronunciation of each sound, so that the person you are talking to can easily understand you. It's a wide spectrum. When I speak English, I have an accent, but the majority of the time, the person I'm talking to doesn't give me a confused look or ask me to repeat myself. Different people are familiar with different variations of pronunciation, and the further away you get from the familiar sound, the more difficult it becomes to understand. That's why Chinese people can understand regional accents fairly easily because they're used to hearing them. But they might struggle more with a non-native speaking Chinese with an American accent. They're just not used to it, especially in small towns. It's also why the average American doesn't struggle too much with a native Spanish speaker's English. You hear it all the time. But if you are not used to hearing an Indian accent, it might be a bit tougher. In short, it's totally fine to have an accent, but we need to make sure your pronunciation is as close as possible to what a native speaker can easily understand. Number 3, people treat learning Chinese like memorizing facts. Chris is taller than me. This car is white. The third tone is a low and flat tone. Yes, not dipping.
Remember when you tried to learn how to swim using the internet?
I did learn how to swim.
On the floor.
But Sheldon can't learn to swim by watching YouTube videos, and you can speak clear Mandarin by just reading or watching videos. Plus, like my student Todd found, there's conflicting information all over the internet. Even worse, with AI presenting all its conclusions as fact, that makes it hard to know who or what to trust. And when it comes to bad information out there, I could make a whole video about this and how to find good information. Let me know if you want to see that video. But let's just say you finally find your trusted source. They don't just tell you that this sound is pronounced ji, qi, xi. They tell you how. So curl your tongue so the tip of your tongue is behind your lower teeth. But it's not about just knowing that this is how it's done. Yeah, you now know how to pronounce the sound as a fact, but you need to actually open your mouth, put your tongue in the right place, and practice doing it right. That's how you feel the difference physically and learn a new skill. Number 4, you only practice individual words and sounds. Let's say you already know you need to practice because, well, that makes sense, right? But a lot of people only practice in isolation.
我
Not bad.
想
Nice.
出
Got it.
去
Nailed it.
我想出去
But they don't practice putting it all together. We speak Mandarin in phrases and sentences, not just words. Getting the tone right in the full sentence versus in a singular word is a completely different beast. I've encountered so many students who study Chinese for years and could pronounce words pretty okay by themselves. But since most courses just teach you the basics of pronunciation in words, if they even do that, once they get thrown into a full sentence, everything falls apart. And the intonation of their native language comes out.
我的中文很糟糕，但是我学用中文。
Even if you try your best to speak sentences with correct tones, you may sound like this.
我是来自美国的 Nikki。
很开心看着这次继续念。
我们每天不见不散。
But when you focus on putting it all together, you end up with this.
我是来自美国的 Nikki。
很开心和大家一起参加12周的训练营。
祝你们继续进步，学习快乐。
Number 5. People try to run before they can walk. Obviously, everyone wants to have a fluent conversation. So some people dive into speaking long sentences without really laying down proper foundations. So their tones and pronunciation end up all over the place. It's even worse when some teachers, bad teachers, tell you that in sentences we don't really have obvious tones.
Yeah, people told me this, so I just thought that if I spoke fast enough, any tone mistakes wouldn't matter. And after a while, one of my teachers sat me down and told me my tones were all messed up. So I ended up having to rebuild from the ground up. That sucked.
Even my student Miley, a professional voice actress, someone who's really good at modulating their voice and intonation, found this wasn't as simple as it may seem like. When you work on things in a specific order and an actual structured way, you can make real improvements. And it's probably faster than you think. And you'll find that when you go to a coffee shop, order a flat white, and the person you are talking to doesn't even react, that's solid Mandarin. It's worth 10 times more than a person freaking out over your perfect ni hao. Number 6, people overestimate themselves. And that's just human. A lot of people get a little understanding of what stuff should sound like. They just expect they'll be able to hear clearly and say the sounds naturally over time. But if a sound just isn't in the language that you can speak, your ears, brain, and mouth muscles all need time to be trained for the new sounds. So what you think you are hearing isn't exactly what the other person is saying. And if you believe when people speak Mandarin fast, there's no tone anymore, it's just because your ears are not trained to hear the tones yet. Same thing with your own speech. You might think you are saying it right, but that's not what's coming out. If you don't know how to make the sounds and haven't practiced doing it right, they just go out so easily when you speak with others, trying to find the right words and sentence structures. That's why getting some sort of feedback is really important. Imagine singing off key and no one telling you. Get yourself a tutor or someone who can steer you right. Number 7, thinking any Chinese person can be a good Chinese teacher. Before we dive into this one, I'm talking specifically about teaching and correction. Targeted things that help you improve so fast that you don't even recognize your Chinese voice from a few months ago. So, my parents are from Shanxi and grew up speaking Jing dialect, Shanxi Hua. They've spoken a kind of accented Putonghua for their entire lives. Though growing up, this never stood out to me. They're here helping us take care of the baby. And I recently noticed that they don't really differentiate some Putonghua sounds, like 我把宝宝包起来了 or 我把宝宝抱起来了 宝宝趴了 or 宝宝爬了 肉炖上了 or 肉冻上了 It can be quite confusing, but even people who speak native, non-regionally accented Putonghua aren't necessarily equipped to give you efficient feedback. They can tell when something sounds wrong or feels wrong, but probably don't know how you should fix it. And even when it comes to teachers, unfortunately, a lot of teaching standards progress incredibly slowly. Even though Zhao Yuanren was talking about how the third tone isn't a dipping tone 100 years ago, that's still just how the average Chinese teachers teach it. It's not a dipping tone. I get really worked up over this one, but I talk about here if you want a more involved breakdown. That's not to say that you can't improve with chatting with Chinese natives. Having people to chat with you and potentially try to give you some feedback is great. But the last few years, I have seen tons of people deciding to become Chinese teachers, relying on half-baked training courses as their preparation. And when trying to recruit Chinese teachers, a lot of these training courses use getting English practice as a selling point for being a teacher. So a lot of these people are not great teachers. Number 8, getting it right once doesn't mean that you can do it every time. This one really upsets me, not because it's a terrible thing or anything, but you are just so close. A lot of my teacher friends have shared stories of helping a student correct a sound. You see the sense of success and the confidence it brings, but then they move on to new words and phrases, and before that proper pronunciation has been internalized, it quickly slips back to that foreign sound. These teachers have been teaching for years, many for decades, but they don't have the time, resources, or specific expertise to really nail down that sound. When you finally get a tricky sound down, you should be proud. But also, this is the time to double down and keep practicing. Just like when you want to master a skill, you don't get it right once and move on to the next thing. If you're learning the guitar or working on a chord, once you get it right the first time, you make sure you get it right another 100 times. That's how you get really good and ready for the next thing. Number 9, people are much less consistent than they think they are. When you are now being pushed by either a super strong internal motivation or have an external force pushing you forward, most people have trouble being consistent. When studying my course by themselves, only 5% of students make it through every single lesson. It's just really easy to be distracted or, well, be lazy. It's why people fail at New Year's resolutions. And that's why accountability programs are so successful. Even just saying, I'm gonna send my grandma a voice message of me speaking Chinese every day is helpful. She doesn't need to understand anything you are saying, but grandma's support and expectation of that voice message is a big motivator to keep you going. Even better, having a community of like-minded people all striving for the same goal is incredibly effective for adults who are learning something online. Your fellow Mandarin learners can help you answer questions, share common struggles, and give advice on how to keep going. That's what I love seeing with my students in our Finding Your Mandarin Voice community. You know you are not doing this alone. Now, if you really want to avoid all the guesswork, finally master Mandarin pronunciation, and gain the confidence to have great conversations in Chinese, check out my Finding Your Mandarin Voice program in the link below. And remember, with Fang 老师, Chinese makes perfect sense. See you in the next video.